Loud and noisy art classes really stress me out. I found it also drains my energy. Having appropriate levels of noise in my art room is a high priority to me because I feel it increases learning in my art room and it helps my students to use their class time more productively. You should also be concerned about noise level in your room if you have students with any hearing issues, if you have students in your classroom with any type of learning disability, if you have any students that struggle with attention or they have sensory issues and they get overstimulated, you really need to keep a check on the noise levels in your classes. Also, students that suffer from auditory processing or any kind of speech or language delays can really benefit from having a quieter art room. Hey there, if we haven't met before, my name is Katie Jarvis and I'm a K-6 elementary art teacher and I teach at a Title I school just outside of Washington, D.C. I've been teaching art for 22 years now and I'm going to share with you some of the things that I do to have a quieter, calmer art room. The first thing I want you to think about is your art room acoustics. Now, some of these things you're going to have control over and some of these things you're not. One thing that is likely out of your control is the noises outside of the space where you're making art. So if your classroom is near a hallway, if you're in a trailer, if you have, like I am near a courtyard, the noises and things that are going on out there are not within my control, but I can close my classroom door. I can close the windows. That will help a little bit with sound. There have definitely been situations where I couldn't do much to help the noise. I taught in a classroom with a beautiful high ceiling, but noises would just bounce off those giant walls, and that made the noise level sound much louder than it really was. It was also difficult for me to project in that art room. I've also taught in an art room, much like mine now, that was up against a courtyard of this school, but the courtyard was filled with goats and chickens and a strange number of roosters. So that was a lot of noise and a lot of smell. So just keeping the windows and the door closed helped me in all of those situations, and I just made the best of what I could. Now, inside of your classroom, check with your fire marshal, check with your school rules before you go off and purchase anything or set anything up. But one thing that can really help is having a carpet or a rug if that's your jam. Many people think, and their room is really messy, so that doesn't really fit to have that in their art room. But I use it at the beginning of my class, and I also use it as a space for early finishers to play with Legos or Magnetiles or other toys. Something else, if you're allowed, curtains or blinds can help to absorb some of the sound. In art rooms, we've got these big giant tables, and that really bounces a lot of sound off. So anything you can think of to help dampen that sound in your art room would be beneficial to you. For me, I have a couple of giant stuffed animals and some canvas artwork up on top of my cabinets, and that does seem to help a little bit with the noise. Something that you can also do is if you have bulletin boards or space in your room to hang up some fabric, that would be great. The fabric could be used on those bulletin boards. I know I've seen teachers put up like felt or hang corkboard, and that absorbs some of the sound. One thing that I do in my art room is I have chair socks, and I have a video all about these. It is a giant piece of felt. All the measurements and stuff are there in that video, and we use a zip tie to connect that on. Now, this helps for that awful, nasty, like screeching sound on the ground, but also it absorbs some of this sound because you can notice I made these really big. I just think they're cute. They kind of look like big giant lollipops or flowers or something, but it helps to absorb the sound. Now, a tennis ball, of course, is something that a lot of people use, but I prefer the felt because this color codes my tables, and also it's got more fabric on it than the tennis ball, so it's absorbing more of the sound. Also, above all else, you have to teach your students that when everybody's talking, how loud it gets, and really emphasize that it's much more enjoyable to make artwork when things are a little bit quieter. My number one strategy for monitoring and communicating noise levels in my art room is a simple laminated sign that says yellow zone, And another one that says red zone. The sign is normally on the yellow zone as the students are coming in. And then whenever I'm changing this sign, I make a big deal and announce it to the class. So if I'm starting my lesson, I will say, we need to change the sign now to the red zone. I say Mona, you say Lisa. Mona, Lisa, Mona, Lisa. Check that your hands are still. Check that your eyes are forward, and check that your lips are zipped. We're changing the sign to the red zone. Remember, that means no talking. And then I would proceed with my lesson. When we are ready to start giving out jobs, I would say, we're changing our sign to the yellow zone, but we need to remain quiet so that we can hear who the helpers are for today and what their jobs are. I would also narrate this at the end of class. I would go ahead and I ring a little bell and I say, how do you think we did? Time to move your feet to your seat. And then we have students reflect, how did we do with our cleanup? And then they say, and then I'll say, our points for cleaning up. And then I'll say that I'm changing the sign to the red zone, because now we're starting to think about your classroom teacher and what kind of line they would like when they come to pick you up. So we won't be using our voices anymore. We're going to begin lining up. So each and every time I'm changing it, it's not a surprise for them or a shock. I keep referring back to these. And sometimes I'm using it as a reminder. I'm just silently pointing to it. But it's a super easy strategy. I've had lights in the past and I just got sick of buying batteries. This was easier for me to maintain and to keep up. Another strategy that works along with my yellow zone, red zone is to have a noise sensor. Now, I don't really have anything fancy. It's not a noise sensor. That's just what I call it to my students. So if it gets a little bit of loud in my classroom and it's bothering me, I will press one of the remotes. I highly recommend you get an electronic doorbell, but try to get 2 remotes with it. That way you can hide them in 2 different spots in your room if you want to use it like I do. I will not let my students see, but I will press this button. And when it goes off, oh no, we set off the noise sensor. I'll act like I have no idea how it got into my room, but I'll just explain that sound always goes off when it's getting too loud. And whenever I hear that sensor, I have to put up a frown. Now, I will do this, and then the students will stop. They make a sound. It goes along with my behavior management system. That way they all know what just happened. We were too loud. It resulted in us getting a frown. Now, if my students get 3 frowns. So maybe we stopped once or twice during the lesson and there were 2 frowns there. We got back to our seats. It was noisy. We got that 3rd frown. I would say now we have to have 5 minutes of silent art to reset. So I'm changing the sign to the red zone, and I set this smaller timer and add up 5 minutes to this. And if someone is talking during that 5 minutes, I will add on more time, and I will just use positive peer pressure to keep everybody silent. I definitely circulate around the room during this silent art time, but it makes things much calmer. So when that timer goes off, I change the sign back to the yellow zone, but I say, we're going to be smarter now. We're going to work quieter, because if they get a 4th reminder and get a frown and the sound, goes off again, they get an additional 5 minutes of silent art. Typically for me, this will happen maybe once or twice in a school year with a class, and they get the idea. They much prefer to have a yellow zone where they can talk quietly in the art room. So it is a really good motivator. And I think it's really nice if you set up a noise sensor idea that you are blaming the sensor and they aren't blaming you for kind of being grumpy and grouchy that it's too loud. I firmly believe that if you want a quiet, calm art class, you really need to work on having the class start out that way. So that might mean that you have to go out and greet your students in the hallway and help them to calm their bodies before they come in. For me, the classroom teacher stands at the door. I stand on the carpet area and I help to seat students. It works the same way each and every time. I have a slide up greeting the students, reminding them they have to sit and be quiet. Once all the students are seated, I have a slide that we will go over where we will review how did we do with coming in? Did we stay in our line? Were there no sounds? Did we sit right down on the carpet with our eyes forward and our ears listening? And I will record that as a point with my behavior management system. If you want more tips on how I start an elementary art class, I have a video all about that. I'll be sure to link it in the description down below. Another thing I do with these points and noise levels is I will point out energy shifts. So if I notice, wow, boys and girls, I noticed that when you started painting, everyone got very quiet and focused, I am going to add up another point. I'll also point out negative energy shifts. I noticed when you went to get your art shirts that some people started screaming and yelling and pushing. We need to put up a frown. So pointing those things out so that everybody is aware of it, that they know, that you know, and that you're not liking those noise levels, they can work on those things and improve them. To help maintain a quiet and calm art room, I will walk around often while my students are working. Just being in the proximity of them and having them get reminders directly from me to stay focused and work quietly really helps. Often I will be working on other projects, but I will rotate. Like maybe I'm grading papers up here, but then I'll sit at the red table for a minute and grade papers there. And then maybe I'll stand over at the purple table and grade papers there for a few minutes too. That also helps. So they really don't know where you're going to pop up and they are staying more focused. A thing that really changed the noise levels in my art room, I started using this in my classroom last year, I've talked about it quite a bit on my channel, is podcast. So my students listen to podcasts when they are working. And I do this mostly with just grades 2 through 6. I have a whole video that breaks down what podcast we like to listen to, how I really set that up for success with my students, and how we are able to use that as a routine in our art room in a separate video. I'll link it down below, but it's definitely one that you may want to try out, especially when you're starting a new school year. It's a great routine to start from the beginning of the school year, getting them to really enjoy working quietly, getting them to focus in on their artwork, but enjoy the story as well, really helps. It's a very positive way that you're not just like shushing them to be quiet for no reason. They start to enjoy that they can get lost in their artwork, and they see that it's nicer to be working when everyone is quiet versus people screaming and yelling and distracting one another. If you've had a minute to look around at other videos on my channel, there's a theme. I really like clear, solid routines. I am obsessed with learning and trying to get better at art room management because it makes your job as an art teacher easier. Now, I've got lots of videos to help you out. One of my favorites is my routine about lining up. I do a completely silent dismissal, but I had to teach those things. So I break down in that video the game that we play to keep the kids quiet, but I also let them know what will happen once the classroom teacher is there, because they would just start screaming and yelling things if I didn't teach this, okay? I do not have magical unicorn children at my school, but I really anticipate what could go wrong and clearly show those expectations for routines. Another routine that can get real crazy real quick is cleaning up. So I have a video, how to avoid the cleanup chaos, that breaks down those routines. All students have something that they need to do. I have a system where I am really clearly giving directions to them so that all can hear. I give directions starting at the beginning of class, spoiler alert for that video, but I give the cleanup directions twice. So they've heard it already. I've taught it when they're sitting at the carpet, doing our lesson, how we're going to clean up, and then I'm reviewing that at the end. So my cleanup isn't so chaotic. It's not the screaming and yelling and the playing, because students know what is expected and they move through that routine quickly. If you're looking for some tips and tricks on talking and interrupting during your lesson, because I did hear that feedback from a lot of teachers that students, were talking while they were talking, like having side conversations. Students were shouting out. The class wouldn't get quiet when they wanted to start the lesson. So I have a whole video that I hope you'll watch next on how to manage the talking.